Now, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming along. It's a terribly exciting number of people and group of people who are either local residents or experts or kind of officials in the management of this area. I'm Ruth Westerby. I'm the convener for Friends of Bartonshire Meadows. We're a community-based group set up about 2 years ago. We set up in early 2020 in response to local land management, to regional flooding, and to the global climate crisis. As a community group, we've got a focus on taking practical steps to improve environmental stewardship, not just for the people of Hereford, for whom these meadows, Bartonshire Meadows, are very dear, but of course, as well, the environment. So those are our dual focuses. I'm sure most of you know what we have been up to in the last couple of years, so I'm not going to talk about us, but if you want to find out any more, you can go to our website, which is friendsofbartonshiremeadows.org. So please do check that out if you want to know more. I am ever so delighted to be able to announce the speakers that we have for you today. We have Emma Rothero from the Floodplain Meadows Partnership, Caroline Hanks from Herefordshire Meadows, and we've got Andrew Nixon from Herefordshire Wildlife Trust. So I'm going to do the formal intros and then I'm going to hand over to our speakers. So Emma Rothero is manager of the Floodplain Meadows Partnership. She engages people working or operating in land management and conservation sector in the UK with research focused on the eco-hydrology of floodplain meadows undertaken by academics at the Open University. She's responsible for maintaining contacts throughout the sector, developing initiatives that will encourage engagement and assessing the impact of engagement and involvement on people and floodplain meadows across the UK. And the Floodplain Meadows Partnership have been a bit of a beacon to us since we set up this group, largely on the basis of Anna Gundry saying they're really cool, you should check out their Floodplain Meadow handbook on how to restore a floodplain meadow. So it's very exciting to have her here. Caroline Hanks is bringing kind of the expertise from Herefordshire to the discussion this evening. She is coordinator of Herefordshire Meadows, a group of farmers and smallholders who are managing and creating flower-rich grassland at field and landscape scale across the county for a whole range of environmental and agricultural benefits. Then our final speaker today is Andrew Nixon. He's the Senior Conservation Manager at Herefordshire Wildlife Trust and has been working in the conservation sector for over 25 years. I won't introduce any more about him now because I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with him and the work of Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, but I should say that Herefordshire Wildlife Trust have been extraordinarily helpful in helping us and guiding us over the last couple of years, so thanks ever so much there.
Awesome. Great. Hi, thanks everybody. My name is Emma Rothero. I'm the Floodplain Meadows Partnership Project Manager, and I've been here for the whole time of the partnership, and I'm going to give you just a general overview of floodplain meadows in the UK, if that's all right. So I thought I'd start by talking about what floodplain meadows are. I'm just trying to get rid of that. That's it. Floodplain meadows are an agricultural crop on a floodplain where the grass and flowers are allowed to grow through the spring and summer and then cut to provide a hay crop. The grassland is then exploited further by allowing animals to graze the aftermath, therefore providing a second feed source into the winter until the system becomes too wet to home animals safely. The result of this traditional management has been a very species-rich plant community entirely created by and reliant upon the agricultural management over centuries. I'm having a problem with my Zoom. Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. Archive evidence shows that floodplain meadow hay was so highly valued because of its natural fertility produced from floods that it was one of the most expensive land use types in the Domesday Book. Communities arranged and managed their local meadows, typically with at least one floodplain meadow per parish, to ensure the best quality hay crop, often dividing the land into strips and sharing it out. On some meadows, the strips were rotated each year, allowing the best areas to be shared around. This map shows Porthome Meadows in Cambridgeshire and the hay lots that were allocated in 1772. This meadow is still managed as what's known as Lammas system today, with hay allocated each year in roughly the same pattern as it was in 1772, as shown by the red lines, which are the current hay lot allocations. Looking at another site where archive research has been undertaken, this slide shows the extent of floodplain meadow in the River Rother, taken from the tithe maps in the 1840s. Almost 100% of the floodplain was floodplain meadow at that time, and the earliest mention found in the archives of meadows here is from 1337. Other sites still managed in this traditional lammas way, with a hay crop followed by aftermath grazing, followed by the site being left over winter and then shut up into the spring to make hay, include Lug Meadow in Hereford and North Meadow in Cricklade. The picture on the left shows the different marker stones used to indicate hay ownership across the large open space of Lug Meadows, some of which are still used today. And the picture on the right is taken from Upton Meadow in Gloucestershire, another lammas meadow, where strips are still allocated to local farmers and marked out by concrete posts or by plastic bags on fences, whatever comes to hand. So this is an ownership and management system that's repeated across the country, with extensive areas often largely owned by the church with tenant farmers. Not all floodplain meadows were managed in this way, of course. Some meadows were in single or private ownership, but those that were managed as lammas meadows are more likely to have survived because of the complex ownership arrangements. The marker stones image is scanned from Anthea Bryan's History and Natural History of the Lug Meadows. If you've not already seen this book, it's extremely useful and charts the extent of the church involvement in Lug Meadows, amongst other things. And I'll just hold that up. And if you can get hold of a copy of it, it's a very nice little summary of how to research your meadow and what you can find out about it. And as a follow-up, this is the map of marker stones at North Meadow in Cricklade, where the stones themselves have been listed on the Historic Environment Record as being of cultural or historical significance. And I think that's the only place in the country that I'm aware of where that has actually happened. And the picture on the right shows one of the extant stones at North Meadow registered to John Boot. It says on the slide there that they've got documentary evidence of the meadow being managed from 1588. And it's likely been meadow since the early medieval period. So this pattern of management has a long and interesting history and has been written about. We can't easily quantify the financial impact of this management on our landscape and society over the centuries, although we know the hay was crucial to prevent bankruptcy in many cases and contributed to the wealth of the institutions that owned these sites through the collection of taxes and fees. On the Lug Meadows in Herefordshire, the book I just referred to, she included this statement right at the start because she wished to emphasize the value of Lug Meadows to the church who owns them. And she said, here at Hereford, we are not just looking at an interesting view or an interesting arrangement of plants. We're looking at an increasingly rare example of an area of land whose management helped to hold together the very fabric of a past society. Without the Lug Meadows of this world, there would have been no Hereford Cathedral, no Mappamundi, perhaps not even a Hereford itself. And I think it would be really interesting to know more about whether Barthamshire Meadows would also have contributed to that wealth in the past. We are about to publish a report showing the extent of floodplain meadow research using publicly available digital maps in 2 subcatchments, part of the Thames in Oxfordshire, which is shown on this map here, and some of the Stour in Dorset. And we plan to share this as a potential toolkit for community groups and others interested in researching the history of their local
We just missed you, Emma. You've
floodplain land use, just using.
Can you just
have I? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just go back a sentence or two.
Back a sentence or two. We plan to share this as a potential toolkit for community groups and others interested in researching the history of their local floodplain land use. The map shows the parishes that we've researched along the Thames. Some of the key conclusions of the work are that each parish had at least one floodplain meadow, and some parishes had several, showing the importance of these systems to the local community, and that there is a relationship between the size of the population, recorded as number of households, and the extent of meadow in acres, recorded in the Doomsday Survey, showing that as the population increased, so did the extent of meadow have to increase. So to change the subject a little bit, to demonstrate what we know about how floodplain meadows function in terms of the relationship between hay, water and nutrients, I'd like you to talk me through the hay cycle. And I apologise for my slightly noddy animations, but I hope it helps to make sense. So in summer, from April to June, the flowers and grasses grow and support a high diversity of birds and invertebrates. It is the variability and productivity of grasses and flowers that makes the hay crop so valuable. During June or into July on some sites, the hay is cut and bales removed. This represents a loss of nutrients from the system. This is followed during late summer and autumn by grazing. Grazing represents both a loss of nutrients as animals eat grass and put on weight, and again as animals deposit it back onto the meadow. The stock are removed as conditions underfoot become wetter, the winter rains come, the soils fill up with water, the site floods, and the deposition of silt. Sorry, I'm just catching up with the little pictures. The deposition of silt represents a gain of nutrients to the system to replenish that which has been removed in the hay crop. And so the cycle begins again, allowing the nutrients to remain in balance. At each stage, the weather can have a critical impact on both the quality of the hay and the biodiversity of the site. And to get the best biodiversity and hay quality, the land manager needs to be flexible in any one year to maintain the balance between the nutrient input from floods and the exported nutrients in the hay crop.
Hey, Emma, it's brilliant. And someone has asked if you could slow down just a little bit, please.
Sorry.
So you can keep up. Thank you.
Okay. The result of this traditional management, working in harmony with the flood and nutrient cycle, has been a very species-rich plant community, entirely created by and reliant on the annual cut to keep the coarser species from dominating. These meadows are very rich in plant species. In the best sites, you may find up to 40 plant species per square metre, which is a phenomenally large number of plants. Of course, this does not account for the insects and other invertebrates that may be found there. In terms of botanical interest, we define plant communities according to the National Vegetation Classification, which attempts to describe all plant communities in the UK. The two main plant communities that have arisen as a result of the annual hay crop, aftermath grazing, and regular flooding cycle of floodplain meadows are what's known as the MG4 and the MG8 communities, where MG stands for mesotrophic grasslands. MG4 is the Burnet floodplain meadow community, defined by the two main species found there, and they're shown on the slide. You've got great burnet here and meadow foxtail just here. More recent work undertaken by ourselves has divided this plant community into 4 sub-communities that separate out on both hydrology and soil fertility. And these are now incredibly rare. I mean, you can see the distribution across the country on the map now, and there are fewer than 1,350 hectares left in the UK. 5 of these are designated as special areas for conservation, and most of them are designated as SSSIs as well. We calculate that 1,350 hectares is smaller than the size of Heathrow Airport. Likewise, the MG8 community, or marsh marigold carnation sedge grassland, is found on similar but slightly wetter sites. Again, our recent work has redescribed the communities of this. And as you can see, this wetter plant community is more widespread across England and Wales, but no less rare, with fewer than 1,500 hectares remaining in England and Wales. And again, most of those are designated as SSSIs. As the hay cycle showed, the removal of a hay crop exports nutrients from the floodplain. Our research shows around 6 kilograms per hectare per year of phosphorus can be exported in this way, which when added up across a large meadow can be a very significant amount. We're currently working with a developer to see if the creation of a floodplain meadow could be used to offset the nutrient input into the catchment from a new housing development. And if floodplain meadow creation occurred at scale, it would go a long way to helping reduce the amount of phosphorus in our river systems. In this section, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the values that we gain now from floodplain meadows, as opposed to some of the values that we gained in the past, perhaps, which were perhaps more agricultural and fundamental. What we now call other benefits of natural systems, otherwise known as natural capital or ecosystem services, the things that we get from nature for free. We think floodplain meadows provide an awful lot of those things, and that we should be telling government about that. And so I'm just going to run through some of the things that we think floodplain meadows do provide to us, and to provide you with some figures where we've got them. Phosphorus as nutrients is one of those. In terms of sediment that is deposited on a floodplain meadow, we have recorded volumes of the order of 50 tonnes per hectare of sediment from floods. This sediment, if deposited on arable fields, would run off again and end up back in the rivers, causing siltation and blockages, carrying with it associated nutrients. Meadows help stop this process through permanent vegetation and roughness, and they absorb the nutrients deposited and recycle it into a productive crop. Floodplain meadows with their well-structured soils offer lots of airspace and allow floodwaters to filter through the soils compared to the more compacted soils of arable systems, monocultures, or hard surfaces of development. They accommodate these floodwaters while still producing their agricultural crop and biodiversity. Very topically, they store large amounts of carbon in their soils. In grasslands, and particularly alluvial grasslands, root systems of grassland plants can grow to several meters, occupying large volumes of the soil. So this ensures a more even distribution of carbon compared to restored woodlands. These species-rich grasslands support a diversity of root systems, as you can see in the slide. And this is a poster that we produced this year through a combination of one of our very creative PhD students, Vicky Boskill, and our research manager, Irina Tatarenko, who has scoured the literature to find evidence of root systems of plants that are of interest to us. And they've put together this fabulous poster, which is available as a hard copy, or you can download it from our website. If you want it, let me know. And it shows that species like the great burnet, which is this one at the end, or bird's foot trefoil, which is this one here, or knapweed here, have incredibly deep rooting systems that can go down to below 2 meters. You can see that there is as much diversity in root systems as there is above ground, and where species diversity is high, plant root systems occupy more space more efficiently than if growing individually, allowing them to lay down carbon in a greater volume of soil. A recent study that showed that species-rich grasslands restored from species-poor grasslands store more carbon in their soils, so grassland restoration is good for deep soil carbon storage. And floodplain grassland soils grow deeper with each flood and are able to store more carbon over time. Our as yet unpublished research shows that species-rich floodplain meadows can contain over 100 tons of carbon per hectare in the soil, more than woodlands, improved grassland and arable systems in floodplains, and we're currently undertaking further research to quantify this. We would like to counter the view that woodlands store more carbon than grasslands, and to promote the idea that grasslands are a better, more secure long-term carbon store. And this tapestry of a soil profile was produced by Jean Widows of Cricklade as part of an embroidery and tapestry exhibition some years ago, and shows beautifully the depth and different profiles of the ground beneath our feet. So I've talked about the biodiversity in terms of plants, but here are some images of the range of invertebrates and birds that you might find. I'm not going to try and name them or talk about any of them in any detail, but it just underlines the importance of pollinators to society. And we'll have some eye-watering figures in a minute that have been calculated to reflect the importance of pollinators. And floodplain meadows very much tick the box in terms of the provision of habitat for pollinators. I think we can probably all agree. And finally, not to be understated, the cultural and aesthetic benefits of floodplain meadows, with some examples here. The top left image is North Meadow in Cricklade, which is home to 80% of the UK's snake's head fritillary population. It's a national nature reserve and accommodates on average 12,000 people per year who come and see the fritillaries during April. As I've already mentioned, they're a rich source of information on cultural history, helping us to understand the last 1,000 years of rural life. They're also places of learning and knowledge, as with many natural and semi-natural habitats. The two examples I've used here are the middle left image, which shows our annual fritillary count undertaken by volunteers at North Meadow, something we've done for more than 20 years. And then the middle bottom image, which is my son, about 3, realizing that the picture in the book was the same as the flower in the meadow. It's a little moment of light bulb for him. And of course, the picture on the right shows that floodplain meadows were, and potentially could be again, able to provide other products than just hay and grazing land. And this shows 2 people from Cricklade, an image I was given from the Cricklade Town Museum, showing them picking fritillaries to go up on the train and sell in London. Of course, this isn't allowed today as they're now so rare, but it would be lovely if they were so common they could be used in this way once more. So what the research shows increasingly clearly is that the greater the botanical diversity, the more these habitats can deliver this wide range of ecosystem services. So we need to look after our floodplain meadows, to value them for all these reasons, and to support those landowners who manage them or who are able to restore them, because they're both productive and beautiful, and because they're good for us in ways we don't even now fully understand. I thought it might be of use, having kind of summarized a bit about the history and the biodiversity and the natural capital, to just show you some other examples of other community groups that I have contact with, who are also working on floodplain meadows. This shows the Cricklade Court Leet, who have been established for centuries as the overseeing body of the management of North Meadow. They do still do that to a certain extent, and they're responsible for the grazing of the site, but they also undertake an extensive public engagement programme, including guided walks, running a website, the provision of tea rooms and fundraising, as well as helping Natural England to manage the site. Some of this is also done in partnership with another community group in Cricklade called the Cricklade Bloomers. We recently submitted a bid with them to Biffa, I think it was, to try and purchase some land adjacent to North Meadow. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful, but it's the kind of thing that a community group can really be effective at. This is another community group that we're working very closely with, called the Thames Valley Wildflower Meadow Restoration Project, and they're established around a very nice species-rich meadow in Oxfordshire called Longmead. They have a long-term vision to restore floodplain meadows alongside the Thames, north and west of Oxford, and they run a care farm project to collect seed and grow plug plants. They are actively in dialogue with a large number of landowners to the north and west of Oxford and the Oxford University colleges to develop floodplain meadow restoration projects. And they've recently been in a partnership with us and the Wildlife Trust in Oxfordshire as part of our Ecover project, where we all secured some funds to deliver restoration and research.
Can I give you a 2-minute warning, please?
Okay, yeah, we're good. And this is the Vale Landscape Heritage Trust, and they've been around for some time and have objectives to buy old meadows and orchards in the Evesham Vale. And so they are landowning community group. And finally, the Hurst Water Meadow Trust are interested in this site in Oxfordshire, and they've attempted species restoration and also been exploring restoring the old water meadow structures. So I just hope that gives you a bit of a flavour of the kind of things that people do as community groups on sites. So finally, 500 years ago, Shakespeare wrote about the impacts of changed management on these meadows. He understood it, and he wrote about it in his play, Henry V. And this piece, spoken by the Duke of Burgundy, lamenting the impact of war upon the farmland of France, said, "The even mead that erst brought sweetly forth that freckled cowslip, burnet, and green clover, wanting the scythe, all uncorrected, rank, conceives by idleness, and nothing teems but hateful docks, rough thistle, kexes, burrs, losing both beauty and utility." So even then, such floodplain meadows were as likely found around Stratford were viewed as of benefit both for their function as an important hay crop, but also for their beauty. And I just wanted to share with you our 2 art and craft competition winners as well this year, where we invited artists to come and share with us their creative ideas about some of these issues I've been talking about. And this is our top winner, Alice Walker, who produced this piece called A Precious Resource. And this is Claire Cornish's Season Song, which is an intricate piece of stained glass art with designs representing the many grasses and flowers found on floodplain meadows. And it uses the words, "Cherish the winter floods that nourish our summer hay." And that's me. Thank you very much.
On it there. Okay, thank you so much, Emma. If you have questions for Emma or any of our other speakers, please do write them in the chat function. Specify that it is a question you're asking rather than a comment, and please identify who you would like to answer your question, because the other thing is I'm going to try and finish bang on time this evening at 8:45. So if you leave your questions till the last moment, we won't be able to get to them. Okay, I'd like to ask Caroline Hanks to speak now.
Thank you very much, Emma, and good evening, everybody. So Emma introduced me at the beginning. So I'm Caroline Hanks, and I'm one of the Herefordshire Meadows advisors. And I'm going to pick up on some of Emma's points to explain really why we think Herefordshire needs more meadows and who we've been working with in order to make that happen. And won't be surprised to know that we think it's all about soils and plant diversity. In fact, we see this really important chain of factors coming up from all the way through the food chain, really, from healthy soils through healthy grasslands and swards, healthy livestock, human health and well-being, and also the wider environment at landscape scale. So my next slide, if we can go to the next slide, please. Tells you a little bit about who Herefordshire Meadows are. So we started as an informal discussion group of meadow owners in 2015, actually. And then in 2016, we got Natural England support to operate as a facilitation funded discussion group. We started with 30 members in our discussion group, and we now have 63. And they farm and manage farmland and small holdings just under 5,000 hectares of Herefordshire, ranging from under a hectare to over 500 hectares. So it's a great range of farming and nature interests. And we also have a fantastic network of nearly 500 now other meadow owners who we keep updated and involved with and send our newsletters to and invite to events when we've got space. So my next slide, please. Tells a little bit about what we offer. So we have a whole range of different meetings, indoors and outdoors. So you can see here, this is one of our first soil events. Everybody brought a spade and we dug up Julian's farm here and had a look at soil structure and really began to think about things. We have these training days on our other subjects as well. And we're also able to give advice to meadow owners of all different shapes and sizes. And this ranges from restoration planning, if people know they want to restore a meadow. It also includes grant applications where funding is where we can get hold of funding to help that happen. Occasionally stewardship schemes as well. Many of our members are involved in those. Our partners, Wyneusk Foundation, tend to do those applications in partnership with us. And we focus on the restorations themselves, finding locally suitable seed sources, contractors who are happy to work on meadow restoration at small scale to large scale operations. And we've also got a brush seed harvesting service set up now as well in Herefordshire. And the Wildlife Trust have got one as well. So we've got the capacity now to harvest local seed and use that for really good restoration projects as well. So I want to come on to why we think what some of the opportunities and the drivers are for meadow restoration in Herefordshire. And I've deliberately put this up while I talk to you about the Parlour State, the poor condition of the River Wye, because I think I didn't want to show you on a November evening pictures of the Wye looking grim and green and full of silt, but you know that it's in poor condition at the moment. The fact that we needed a nutrient management plan in order to get our core strategy accepted, and that there are now huge restrictions on development in North Herefordshire, not to mention all the other impacts on our environment. Now, this isn't the place or the time to go into detail now, but we know that human wastewater systems and agriculture are both major contributors to the high levels of phosphate in the River Wye, causing it to fail both as a SSSI and as a special area of conservation. There's some new and compelling research from Lancaster University about the legacy phosphate that's building up in many of our agricultural soils, which is quite alarming. But the good news is that water companies and farmers are responding to this challenge to stop the build-up of phosphate in our rivers and soils and ultimately to reverse the trend. And there are also there's some new current proposals that would export the phosphate in animal manures out of Herefordshire. So Welsh Water are investing heavily to make improvements, and many farmers have started to transform their agricultural systems along the principles that are shown in this lovely drawing. So they're building up soil health by maintaining living roots all year round. They're minimizing soil disturbance where they're cultivating. They're maintaining soil cover throughout the year. They've always got leaves ready to intercept the sunlight. They're increasing the diversity, the range of plants growing on each field, and reintegrating grazing into many different farming systems. And we think these really important principles of what's listed here as regenerative agriculture, people call it different names, whatever you call it, we really feel that diverse meadows and pastures do all of these things. They incorporate all of these principles. They offer us the opportunity, as Emma said, to improve water quality, help with natural flood management, and they're definitely part of the answer to ecological and climate emergency, as well as the other ecosystem services that Emma's mentioned. So my next slide is the fabulous Floodplain Meadows Partnership poster, which Emma's talked about. And I really just wanted, I put it here just a very unlikely event that she didn't use it in her presentation, but just to talk about rest periods and just to be, I've come to this very late in my career, if you like, but to think that the root, she talked about how important rooting depth is and how you can see the fabulous range of rooting depth here from a great diversity of plants. But the rest periods in the grazing and cutting system in a meadow are really influence the depth of the rooting systems of our plants. And I think we all underestimate that. So I'm going to go on now very briefly, if I may, just another minute to talk about carbon and soils and how that interacts with meadows. So that's our next slide, please. We think that the challenges we're facing in the Wye catchment is why we've had so much support for Herefordshire Meadows since we set up in 2016. There's no shortage of farmers and smallholders who share our passion for meadows and who know how important meadow restoration is. So they all share one thing, that they want to all of the benefits that diverse swards brings for their farming systems and the local economy. So we're incorporating legumes to fix nitrogen. We're looking at healthy soils with microbes that are effectively mining for nutrients in the soil, our legacy phosphate included, to feed our plants and crops without the need for any additional fertilizers. And they're great for flood and drought resilience, as I said. But the role of meadows in storing carbon can be underestimated. I think Emma's busted that myth for us. So I'm just going to say that one thing we are particularly concerned about in Herefordshire is that there is a myth that trees are the only thing that are going to help us with climate change and with sequestering carbon. Those figures that Emma gave are very compelling, and we really encourage people to think about planting trees on their land, but avoiding areas that are already flower rich and areas that have the potential to be easily enhanced to be more flower rich in future. And here are some interesting statistics that we pulled out about soils and carbon. So the next slide, which is going to be the last one, talks about the impact that our members and other meadow makers are having across Herefordshire. So you can see these are the restorations that we've supported for the last 3 years. Each coloured circle represents a meadow, not necessarily as large as the circle, sadly, and you can see over the years we've 52 hectares in 2019, just 10 last year when COVID came along. I think a lot more happened actually privately and with private funding from different and in stewardship. And then again, we're over 50 hectares, actually over 60 hectares this year. So these meadow makers are having a great impact in creating meadows all across the county. And we've got new projects with commercial sponsorship. We see opportunities developing in the future, including carbon, the developing carbon markets, the new environmental land management schemes, and local and national businesses too. You can see from where you are at Bartonshire, there are relatively few dots in the middle of the county, and it will be wonderful to see Bartonshire on this map in the future. So my last slide just reinforces the fact some of the things that we do for our training is because we think that doing surveying grassland is such an important part of the restoration process to tell us whether our restorations and changes in management are successful. And we run training days for people who want to be able to do that. And we also buddy people up with volunteers who would welcome the opportunity to go and help with surveys. So if anyone wants to get involved with some of our members, we'd love to hear from you. And just the final slide shows a whole load of the partners that we're working with. These are national and local partners. And we're in the process at the moment of setting Herefordshire Meadows up as an independent entity so that we can continue and expand our work once our facilitation funding ceases in 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Really brilliant. So much information there. And it is recorded, so you will be able to check back on it. There's a lively discussion already happening in the chat function where people are putting their questions, and Emma's put a few answers up already. But we can ask those questions out loud when we've heard from all our speakers. So thanks to Caroline. Do put any questions for her there. And now it's over to Andrew Nixon. And I'm just going to do a super low tech swipe across of your slides, if that's okay, because otherwise
that's fine, Ruth. Okay, yes, good evening everyone. So yeah, as we said, my name is Andrew Nixon. I'm Senior Conservation Manager with Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, and I'm just going to talk a little bit tonight about management of some of our sites, management of what's going on in Herefordshire with by the Wildlife Trust, particularly in relationship to the floodplains where we're actively owning and managing land. So Ruth, could you move on to the next slide, please? So just a quick précis of who we are. I mean, we are your local wildlife trust. We cover the entire county and we cover all species and habitats. We're a member of the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts, now more commonly known just as the Wildlife Trusts. And there's 47 of us across the country. Most of us work at a county level, although in some areas they are an amalgamation of sort of several counties into one trust. And we sort of like got four key areas of work. We have our nature reserves, and I'm going to touch on some of that tonight. That's a big part of what we do. We advocate for wildlife, so we're there fighting for nature at strategic levels, defending nature in planning applications and development, and just being a voice for nature generally. We create living landscapes as well, so this is sort of recognizing those parts of the county which are particularly species rich, but recognizing also that we need to work with communities and residents within those areas to be effective in what we try to do. And then we engage people in nature as well, and we have quite a proactive engagement team that does a lot of education work. We reach about 6,000 children a year. We do family events, so we're continually trying to encourage people to experience nature and defend nature. So my dog has just barged in here a second. I'm just going to send her back out. Sorry about that, collies. We could go on to the next slide, please, Ruth. So yeah, we've got considerable experience of managing sites. So we currently manage 58 reserves across the county. That number seems to fluctuate. It's an ever-changing number. We're always acquiring new sites. In fact, we've acquired 4 over this past 12 months. So we're growing our estate all the time. That number also seems to fluctuate between sort of like 56 and 59, depending on how you add up our various reserves across the county. So I've just plumbed for 58 there, but it's, as I say, it's a growing number. We're increasing our estate all the time, and across that estate we've got quite a variety of habitats, and those predominantly represented within the county, which are of course meadows, species-rich grasslands, woodlands, wetlands, orchards, and hedgerows. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about Lug Meadows. Emma picked up on this earlier on. This is a map of Upper Lug Meadows. We own quite a significant portion of this, but not all of it. It's about 27 hectares in size. And the meadows actually extend below the road as well, below the Ledbury Road. This is only about half the extent of the meadows that we're sort of actively involved in managing. It's ownership. I say we own a fair bit. We're also joined by Plant Life, another conservation body owns some of it, and other bits are privately owned. And so, collectively, though, we manage it as best we can as a single unit. In the past, its ownership would have been far more complicated, and of course, with complicated ownership comes complicated management, or should I say, timings of management. And typically, the way that this site's managed is it's a hay cut with aftermath grazing, dominantly cattle in this instance. It's unusual in that it's common land for 6 months of the year, so from the 1st of August it is effectively common land. And I'd say that there are parallels really with Bartonshire Meadows on this site, in that it's floodplain. It's on the edge of the city, so we get particularly high footfall. Lots of people go there for recreational purposes and to swim in the river. We try to discourage that, but they do swim in the river. Go down there to exercise their dogs. And so there are similarities there, but there are differences also, because it's Lug Meadows is a site of special scientific interest. It already has, it's very important for its biodiversity. It's species rich, and as I say, it's common land as well. We do have threats as well. There are threats from development. For a lot of people, this is the most desirable route for a bypass. And then there are pressures around on the surrounding land from new housing developments as well. And it's also very important for breeding curlew. Actually, could you go to the next slide, please, Ruth? So just to give you some examples from the species, of course, snake's head fritillary is one of the sort of key species that occurs there. Very popular. People go to see that early in the spring. The river itself is also very important for biodiversity and that site of special scientific interest and a special area of conservation as well. Next slide, please, Ruth. And as I say, it's also an important site for breeding curlew. Now, the curlew have pretty much abandoned the upper lug because of disturbance pressure and dogs, but they do still successfully breed down on the lower lug meadows, and where actually there's lower footfall there anyway, but also it's closed off to the public during the curlew breeding season. So there's no public access, and that means that they're relatively undisturbed. We've gone further in the last couple of years by working with Herefordshire Ornithological Club, and now we're sort of like proactively monitoring the curlew populations there. And we've actually been electric fencing up as well to protect them from predation by foxes. But it's still hit and miss as to whether they're successful. We do have problems with corvids. They're very clever and canny, and even putting things like the electric fencing up, if you're not careful, they come down and investigate, and they can quickly pick up that there's something of interest in there and raid the nests. But it is a very important site nationally for breeding curlew, and that curlew is a species that's declined by 46% over the 20 years between 1990 and 2010, and continues to decline as well. Next slide, please. But it's also a site where we've been trying to do restoration work. Not all of the land that we own there is particularly species rich. And one particular area called the Lug Mills, which is our northernmost holding on the Lug Meadows, was a site where we've been trying to improve diversity. About 5 years ago, we did some green hay strewing, and this is hay that was gathered from one of the more species rich parts of the Lug Meadows. And that's had sort of moderate success, I would have said. It's increased the biodiversity, but not as much as we would have liked. So I think, now that it's had a few years since that attempt was made, it's probably time that we might want to try and do more there and enhance it further. And we do have other challenges there as well. I noticed in the chat earlier on there was discussion about high levels of phosphate in silts that are arriving in floodwater, and that is a problem, we think, on this particular site. The hay cuts are perhaps later than we would like in terms of nutrient depletion, The earlier you take a hay cut, the more nutrient you tend to remove. And so we are sort of like seeing a nutrient buildup and getting more problem species, such as docks and thistles. So I think if Shakespeare were to visit it now, he would find too many of the hateful docks and rough thistles. Next slide, please. I'll move on to another site that we manage, the Sturts. In fact, we actually have 3 separate land holdings at the Sturts, which are not quite contiguous, but together add up to quite a bit of land, about 54 hectares, I think, so 130 acres or so. So I suppose it's, yeah, again, in some ways, it's comparable probably to Bartonshire Meadows. It's out in the Letton Lakes complex, and it differs from other floodplain meadows in that it's not essentially flooded by a river. It's just low-lying flat land that is difficult to drain, and so we get water runoff coming onto this land from the surrounding land holdings, and it just surface water, and so it floods every year. So you end up getting the same sorts of communities of plants there that you do on sort of more traditional floodplain meadows. It's also a triple SI, at least on some of it, and it's managed like most floodplain meadows through a sort of hay cut and aftermath grazing by cattle predominantly. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Ruth. And there's a lot of very nice plants that occur there. There's a ragged robin, but we get sort of meadow sweet, lesser pond rush, pepper saxifrage, and species like that. So it's particularly diverse. Because of its location, it's quieter, it has a lower footfall, so we don't have some of those problems of sort of disturbance. But we do have issues now increasingly with the surrounding land uses. We're finding that the farmland surrounding it is becoming increasingly intensive, and that's putting more pressure on the site. But we're fortunate in that it is a big land holding, and so it is resilient to some of those pressures from the surrounding land. Next slide, please, Ruth. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about some other wetland sites or floodplain sites that we manage. And of course, it's not all necessarily floodplain meadows. And if you look at the Lug floodplain between Hereford and Leominster, there are quite a number of sort of large water bodies that are being created through gravel extraction over a number of years. And those workings have created some really quite special and important wetland habitats. And this is one of the sites that we manage. This is Boddenham Lake. We manage this in partnership with New Leaf. It's the largest body of open water in the county, and very important for passage migrant birds and wetland species generally. If you can go to the next slide again, please, Ruth. But one of the issues we've had with the lake is it's not really been realizing its potential in terms of the habitats that it presents. It's a very deep lake with very steep margins, and we know that when it comes to water bodies, a lot of the most interesting habitats and species occur within the shallow areas. That's where aquatic vegetation grows, and emergent vegetation and reed bed. And in those transition areas is where you get a lot of the more interesting habitats and species. And Boddenham Lake was lacking in that habitat. So over the past few years, we've been doing an awful lot of work at Boddenham Lake, creating these sort of shallow margins and reed beds. This is sort of a sequence of photos that has been taken on one of those sort of areas of ground where we've been creating shallows there. And we've created 3 of these, all about an acre in size. And since creation, we've planted those up with reed beds, and that reed bed is slowly establishing. And since creating these shallow margins, we've also been working on some of the islands in the lake. So removing trees, creating shallow water again, more reed beds, more sort of shallow mud habitats, and gravel capped islands. And those are particularly important for birds, breeding birds and wading birds. And we found that it's been successful really quite quickly. And over the last 2 years, we've had birds breeding on the islands that we've haven't had at Boddenham Lake before, such as oyster catcher, little ring plover, which is a sort of Schedule 1 breeding bird, so really quite rare, and has only come there because of the sort of habitat creation works that we've been undertaking. Next slide, please, Ruth. And then,
if you could just maybe have your 2 more minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. And then we've been working also now to expand our sort of wetland habitats in the Lug Valley with the acquisition of Oak Tree Farm, which is just downstream from Boddenham Lake. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ruth. Now at Oak Tree Farm, there is a sort of a narrow strip of floodplain which floods every winter, and that's what you can see here. It creates these very sort of ephemeral shallow pools with sort of more sloping high ground. And what we want to do is make those a more permanent feature. Next slide, please, Ruth. And the idea behind this, if you look at that map on the right-hand side, the top right-hand blue blob is Boddenham Lake, and the blue blob down at the bottom is Wellington gravel pits. And Oak Tree Farm is that darker blue that sits nicely between the two. So we're trying to create more wetland habitat that will link up some of these wetland sites within the floodplain of the Lug. Next slide, please. And so this is sort of like just an outline plan for what we're hoping to achieve there. We've put a planning permission or a planning application in for this work, and we hope to undertake this work next year. And what we'll be doing, as you can see there, we're creating a series of about 9 pools, shallow pools and scrapes down in the floodplain of that site. And what we'd like is those pools to sit within a matrix of species-rich floodplain grassland. Next slide, please. And you know, the upper slopes as well are perfect for meadow restoration. And this is a group of volunteers that were out on a very wet October day, strewing seed that we'd harvested from a triple SI, species-rich grassland triple SI near Malvern, in the hope that we will establish a more species-rich site there. And this was achieved through the Meadow Makers project that Herefordshire Meadows have been running. Next slide, please. Nearly there. But of course, you know, there's other habitats. We've got traditional orchards at Boddenham and at Bartonshire Meadows. Of course, we know there were traditional orchards there as well. So there's you know, there's every possibility, or there's no reason at all why that couldn't be re-established at certain sites. Next slide, please, Ruth. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, we are, you know, big on public engagement, and it's important that we get sort of schools and communities sort of invested in our sites. You know, we want people to enjoy them. All of our sites, except for part of Boddenham Lake and temporary closures to parts of the Lug Meadows, are open to the public all year round, 365 days a year. You know, because we want people to enjoy them and have access to nature. Next slide, please. And so, you know, we put in a lot in terms of provision. This is new access or wider access hide that we've just put in Boddenham Lake in the last few weeks. We've put in 2 bird hides at Boddenham Lake since we took over management, and we've put one now at Oak Tree Farm. We'll be putting in new parking and facilities and interpretation at a number of sites as well. And then finally, last slide, please. And then, of course, volunteers are hugely important as well. This has taken on a volunteer task at the Sturts. We couldn't achieve half the things that we do without the help of our volunteers. We've got over 500 volunteers now that carry out a whole range of tasks, practical tasks on reserves, but also a huge amounts of support in the office as well, and all aspects of our work really. And again, it's another important way that the communities can get involved and engaged in the sites that we manage. And that is me. Thanks, Ruth.
Thank you ever so much, Andrew. Brilliant stuff. And I think maybe that was David Lovelace in the last picture there with his side, perhaps. He's also on the call. So before going to questions, I'm sure most of you are aware that Bartonshire Meadows is owned by the Church Commissioners, and I'd like to say thank you very much to Guy Webb for coming along this evening, who's the officer in charge who has liaised with us over the last 2 years very generously. And Matthew Scott is the land manager at Stratton Parker, who manages this area of land, and Matthew's here as well, and he was happy to give us a little update on the management. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah, good.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for the talk as well this evening. For me, it's certainly an education going forward in relation to the flood meadows, and we're certainly enjoying working with Andrew, Emma, Ruth, and Caroline, and everybody that's been involved so far. Just a bit of an update from our side. I'm responsible with Guy for the Hereford estate, which is owned by the commissioners. So Bartonshire Farm forms part of the Hereford estate, which again forms a part of a much larger rural estate of the commissioners and part of their investment portfolio. So it is managed as an investment for the Church of England. That said, the investment side of things for the Church Commissioners is not just about the pounds and pence. We have an increasing focus on the environmental performance of the portfolio, and there's a significant amount of work at the moment going on to how we quite measure our current baseline and moving forwards to how we're going to be improving that. Bartonshire Farm, we are working with the groups that we have involved, we think is a key part of that strategy, and it's looking at the moment to see how we will develop that, and with thanks to the groups already involved, have given us a lot of education as to the ideas that we might be able to take forward there. It's certainly appreciated that Bartonshire Farm forms a very central green space within Hereford itself, and I'm sure a green space that without a lot of people wouldn't have access to those that recreation. Having been involved with the management here for the last 7 years and seeing the amount of public access locally and the public interest in the area, there's certainly an appreciation here that it is a key asset for the people of Hereford. And since the retirement of our former tenant, we are now looking at how we can take that forward and delivering it, changing from an arable farming system to some form of flood meadows restoration. And that's a plan that we're looking to put together at the moment. At the moment, it might look this year that not a lot has happened on the land. I think that's very fair to say. We are coming out of an environmental stewardship scheme from the farm at the moment, and considering the options along with prospective tenants for future environmental management of the holding, whether that is through countryside stewardship or the government's ELMS scheme, which is still a scheme that is in making. Many farmers don't know exactly what they're going to be sort of paid for what they do, the options that are available. We're very much hoping that there's going to be some options within that will suit Bartonshire Farm very well. Many of you who are local may have noticed that we've recently topped the meadows, really an exercise of putting it to bed for the winter, and looking to pick things up. Hopefully we do not have a harsh winter flooding wise. It's certainly something we've noted over the last couple of years, some very significant flood events, and we're very mindful of factoring that into the future management of the holding to ensure that whatever we do is going to be resilient to that going forwards, and with a view of ensuring that we've got some winter cover on the ground. And for next year, looking to reseed the holding probably in its entirety in the spring, where there's a lot of discussions with Caroline, Andrew, and Emma and Ruth about what's going to go into that mix, and that being with the view of a very early on stage of the initial part of the restoration. But also a lot of work in the background with the team to consider what sort of what a restoration plan might look like. That not just being the pure environmental side of things, but what we might be able to deliver in terms of community benefits. There's a lot of public access on the land at the moment. How could we enhance that? How could we enhance some of this, the historic side of things? There are trees and historic tree rows orchards. How can we factor those elements in to deliver a holding that provides, I think, a lot more than it has done in recent years for the city as well. So that's really a summary of where we are at the moment. We'll be continuing to push forward over the winter whilst we can't do a lot on the ground, and hopefully everybody can watch this space as we take things forward over the next few years and we'll see some major changes.
Thanks so much, Matthew, for coming along and for contributing that. It's really helpful update on what's happening at the moment. Well, I'm sure people may have questions, but what I'm going to do now is stop the recording just for privacy reasons. If you are watching this on YouTube, then we will put together a little blog which will include some of the links to resources that people have mentioned as part of their presentations. So please check out our website, which is friendsofbartonshire-meadows.org, if you'd like to see that. And part of the reason for having this event was to announce a membership structure. So if you would like to formalise your support for the project, please go onto our website and you can see all the fancy bits that we've added there.